The other day we planted a whole bunch of beautiful trees, chestnuts and Japanese walnuts, pretty large ones as well, and the process wasn't that difficult. So I'd like to share how we went about both transporting those trees to our larger site, working the root systems down so that they're a little bit easier to fit into holes, prepping and organizing the space to receive those trees, getting them settled in really thoughtful and thorough ways for the winter months so they can develop feeder roots, as well as some minor companion planting to help protect them from voles and other rodents. So stick around. You can see we started here by developing the space a little bit by pre-flighting some holes where we knew trees would go. Juan went through and I went through and dug decent holes, but nothing too crazy. We can always dig a little bit more as needed. You can see here he's using a sharp shovel. This is a spearhead spade that someone sent us. Nice big root from a pine tree off to the side. So we just leave that there and work around it. That'll be just fine. We transported the trees by banking them in compost in the back of my truck. I laid a tarp down and then put in a bunch of bare root trees, dumped compost from the chicken yard, and that protected them both from freezing and drying while we transported. And that works for some pretty big trees. You can see I'm pulling out here those bare root trees. Normally we'd want to put them directly in water, but this is a very cool, overcast day. It's a perfect day for planting. They're hydrated. As long as we get them in the ground quickly, we should be okay. Could put burlap on top if needed. Juan's pulling some Japanese walnuts here that were field grown for 2 years. Big wide roots, but very ready to get into the earth. We've got our work cut out for us with this project. There's about 50 trees of this size, but the system that we've used here allowed us to plant all of them before lunch the other day. It's a very doable way to go. Here I'm grabbing some partner plants. This happens to be orange mint. It's a really great aromatic support plant to keep rabbits and voles a little bit away from the chestnut trees. We've got a tray of horseradish, some garlic and orange mint. Those will be planted next to the trees. I'm trimming roots that are a little on the bigger side, or better yet, more on the crossing side, like they're getting internally crossed on the tree. And that does not really hurt the tree. You can do this. You can trim a little bit. It just makes it a lot more easy to get reasonable size holes. If you have one tree, keep the roots fully intact and dig a massive hole. If you've got 50 or 100, you can trim roots to make it work. I just expanded the side of the hole a little bit to receive that one nice feeder root that's going out. And then what I do is I take the sod, the weeds that were there, I fold them upside down under the tree. That's going to give like a nice slow feed over time. And then the soil that's in direct contact with the roots, I break it up with my fingers a little bit. If I have a tool, that's great. If there's roots that are folded under, you can see I just pulled that one up and out, so it has a little bit more room to grow. I don't want to have the roots packed, spinning in the hole. I want to trim them back or make the hole big enough. And now I'll support the top of the tree to keep it upright the way I want it to be, and get some really good soil packing that gets rid of some air spaces. I could always soak this in, but it's going to rain at some point and the trees are dormant. Juan here is working with a chestnut tree, a little bit of a bigger hole to accommodate the wider root system there. He'll adjust just a bit after a test fit by putting the roots in there a little, and we're ready to go. We're not going to fuss with these immensely huge holes. It works just fine. We've planted at least 1,000 trees this way, maybe more, and pretty much all of them have grown. So not saying this is the absolute best practice for all people in all places, but for those of you that feel locked up in not being able to plant a tree because, it's just too much work, we're just demonstrating a way that you can get away with, and the trees are just fine with the process. So he's crumbling the soil, putting the weeds right back in upside down. It's really not a big deal. These trees are big enough they should be able to grow past it. We can always mulch thoroughly if we need to. And again, pretty important, holding the tree upright in the way we want to see it oriented and stepping in that soil to get them locked into the ground a bit. I'll now follow up by taking a head of garlic, and for the chestnuts, I push a few cloves right around the tree when I can. This is basically an organic replacer for a plastic mesh around the tree. It is not a silver bullet. It does not perfectly work, but very often it feels like the trees that have had little mints like this applied around them and or garlic seem as though the voles leave them alone a bit better. I really appreciate what those plants can do. They're beautiful and they tend to work nicely. Here I'm shaking out some more soil from amongst the weeds. There's some little bits of wood in there. Cool, might as well use that as mulch. Last little crumbles, and then for our mulch for this tree, there is some old material right nearby from a little ditch. I'll throw some of that on right now to protect the soil. If time allows, we'll come back with compost. If time allows, we'll come back with aged wood chips. Will time allow? That is to be determined, but they'll be fine. Here, Juan is putting in a little bit more garlic around this chestnut. A couple of cloves should have some positive effect. A little wreath of mint root. I will not mind in 10 years harvesting chestnuts by walking through mint. It'll be a pleasant experience for sure. Some old glass bottles here that were broken from a previous farm, and so we'll just use that glass as a nice looking mulch. Clearly, we're not too picky. We just want to get on with things. Here's a little pond we dug with a machine a couple years ago, and on the non-water holding berm side, it's a nice opportunity to put some chestnuts because the soil is very well drained, very clayey, hard to dig. And so Juan, instead of digging a massive hole, is actually trimming the roots back quite a bit. Lots of rocks in there, lots of clay. So we'll head them back. In the fall, when you plant bare root trees, there's a lot more wiggle room to trim roots to fit the hole. In the early spring or mid-spring, especially if the trees are leafing out, you really don't want to cut the roots as much. So fall bare root planting of trees with root trimming is very compatible. In the spring, you want to be a little bit more careful with that. More crumbling of the soil, packing it in, and he'll do the same trick of holding it upright, stepping it in. This is our flow in real time. Some of these trees took between the hole digging and the planting. A 5-foot tree might have been under 5 minutes. So a minute per foot of tree. Here I'm doing a little trick where I planted a Japanese walnut. The soil was hard to dig. There was a root from a dead ash. And so I'm just robbing some soil, some muck from the pond, and I'm building up around the walnut with that. The roots are covered a little bit, but I'd like to go deeper. So I'm just putting clay muck, and the freeze-thaw cycles of winter will break it down. Clearly works. This is a Japanese walnut planted in that style from a few years ago. It is off and running, growing beautifully. A northern pecan planted back in 2009. This was a 6-inch tall tree planted in about a minute or two. Clearly that one grew. All 4 of these trees were planted at different times with the same style, a minute or two per, and they're absolute canopy trees. To protect some of the trees, we'll go through and harvest some bamboo. We've got stands of bamboo that are expanding. We're going to let them dry in the sun for a few days so they don't root, and then we'll push about 10 shoots around every tree. You can see a nice pile here. It's going to lose its leaves over the next few days. And then here we can cut back a walkway that was overrun by bamboo. A nice harvest, a nice opening, a nice yield, and then draw that material, throw it around the trees, come back and stick them in as our free fence later. Someday all trees pass away, and so at the very far end, we have some willows that are slowly breaking down, and even then they're providing beautiful bounty. These are oyster mushrooms we can harvest from an old passing willow. Trees are wonderful. Thank you, trees.